Welcome back. In this, I'd like to discuss Tycoon Intelligence's Tycoon Book 2 outline. And in my Book 2 outline, what I would discuss with you are these points. The human condition. So I talk about the human condition from the point of having leverage or being force multipliers. I talk about noogenesis, the noosphere, something I called high quality characteristic orbs. They were my first iteration, my first understanding, my first ability to collect different traits, characteristics, assessments, and ambitions in terms of what sort of competencies and skill sets, what sort of demeanor and temperament I wanted to have. So I go into discussing some of the high quality characteristic orbs. At the end of this, I'll have just a list of the different high quality characteristics that I talk about. When I first interacted with people, it was just me being able to look at and assess somebody and them having this small characteristic or trait moving around them. Then I would start to see 3 or 4 different ones, and as I would start to assess how I was interacting with them, I might see more and more. And I found that the more complex individuals that I was attracted to were highly intelligent, had a great sense of emotional well-being. They were driven, they had a consciousness of what was going on around them. So I've created initially what I thought of as these high quality characteristic orbs. They're smaller spheres of what I'm talking about now. So in this Tycoon intelligence spheres, I'm talking about this broad capacity to pick out certain aspects or intelligences and fill your own spheres with information, constant learning, constant understanding, constant calibration. And then I'm also talking with regard to the scope of time. I'm also talking about looking at things through the scope of civilization's foundations, and then some specific elements like a primal tribe organization of hunter-gatherers, a corporate office, the general understanding of what and why tycoons do what they do, and modeled in comparison or in contrast to family offices, and then moving forward into the next spheres or domains of understanding. So in this book too, I want to talk more personally about what it means to have a consciousness and awareness of the different spheres, how it affects you as a person, how it affects an individual, as opposed to the very broad scope that I was talking about before. So in this, the human condition, I talk about the noosphere, high quality characteristic orbs, smaller spheres or senses. Talk about metacognition on a personal level, talk about personality types, the Big Five and Myers-Briggs personality tests. Talk about the different types of personalities: introverts, extroverts, omniverts, and there's ambiverts. I talk about the cognitive revolution and how that affects us all, how the development of our brain, our psychology, our behaviors have come about from noogenesis. I talk about noospheres, intellectual strength, stamina, and energy. This is important because, again, there is a precious and tangible capital asset market. There are commodities and there's a marketplace. In this regard, your intellect has a strength, it has a stamina, and there's a certain amount of energy that needs to be deployed to utilize that. I talk about the strength, stamina, and energy. It's about the ability to use it efficiently and focus, and utilizing it for logic and abstract hypothesis, internal and external stamina, and how it has affected you. There are 23 watts of brain power that's utilized when you're utilizing your brain. So there's 23 watts of brain power, so I talk about that. Emotional strength, stamina, and energy I go into as well. Anybody who knows what it is to start a very hard day and then go and interact with people, make your propositions, solve your problems, go through your task list, involve yourself in a new or trying condition, there's an emotional energy that happens and gets utilized. So I talk about emotional strength, stamina, and energy, and I talk about it in particular with regard to how tycoons use their intellectual strength, stamina, and energy, how they use their emotional strength, stamina, and energy, and how as an individual you can be conscious of that and use that as well. I talk about emotional labor. I talk about the containment of your emotions and your intellect being wasted. So I talk about emotion has mass, it has a weight. There's social energy that's used as well. So with that, I talk about the use of energies in the sense of being an introvert, an extrovert, an ambivert, and an omnivert. You know, what sort of energy? Do you draw energy from people? Do people draw energy from you? Are you able to move between the introvert and extrovert capacities? High quality characteristics, this can also be seen as a moral strength or moral intelligence. So I talk about this at a little more length in terms of recognizing, because again, I see it as the top 6 or core Tycoon intelligences: IQ, EQ, high quality characteristics, time-space intelligence, cultural intelligence, and the last one is digital intelligence. So high quality characteristics is a part of one of those. Here again, Tycoon core intelligences, hexagonal prism, being able to put those together and have them work together. I think about them in the form of honeycombing, sphere clustering, or domain clustering. Tycoon intelligence polyspheres we talked about before, but this is about how you personally organize structures. So they're organized structures, different computational combinations based on a need or context. There's an elemental trust builder that happens when you start to pull all of these different intelligences together. So I talk about the elemental trust builders that happen with your intelligences, with your precious and tangible capital asset markets. I think about them in terms of polyspheres as being constellations, and I also think along the lines of periodic table and atomic structures as well. And I can use them as analogies, as again, being able to pull them together, these different intelligences, pull them together, and I can structure analogies, I can structure models with which to solve. I can say, hey, what's most important here in this situation? Tycoon intelligence ecosystems, again, I talk about the sustainability environment, just you being conscious of what intelligences are being operated around you. Do you operate them? Are they part of your organization and structure? I talk about practices of human situational awareness. You know, what are your disciplines? What are you conscious of? Is there some sort of a system that you go through in your mind as you're meeting people, as you're discussing, as you're thinking about interactions that you've had with them? If you're proposing to meet somebody, what are you thinking about in terms of your human situational awareness plan? Tycoon intelligences, again, the beginning are the core TyQs, and I'm going to go over those. Intelligence quotient, that's your cognitive ability. Tests of IQ have been seen as culturally biased. So when I talk about IQ, I'm talking about your cognitive ability, not these formal tests that give you some scaled rating on the IQ test. Probably if I took an IQ test, it wouldn't be very high. But I think that by having a general understanding of intelligence and how all of those different things work together, that it gives me some leverage. It gives me some leverage in understanding how everything works together. You know, I think about Albert Einstein and his theory of relativity. I have a relative idea about what a little bit of everything does, and that gives me a strength. Emotional intelligence, high quality characteristics. Again, it can be seen as a moral intelligence or a wisdom. Time-space quotient or time-space intelligence. It's about having a temporal and spatial understanding of what's going on around you, and also there's a temporal and a mental time stamping that happens as well with the time-space intelligence. Malcolm Gladwell, an author, wrote about hockey players having a particular advantage in time based on when they were born. And so I relate that, for instance, with a Malcolm Gladwell example of hockey players having professional opportunities based on when they were born, when they enter into practice leagues, and being able to try out for professional teams and being ready, mature at that point. So time-space intelligence, it's the ability to seize opportunities and take advantage. Cultural intelligence is number 5 that I list. It's just about understanding the different spaces that you're in, the different environments. You could be in a local area and have and be present inside of a cultural paradigm, a cultural bubble, and being able to understand that. It could also culture is so broad. You could be inside, sneaker collection culture. You could be inside a software development culture. You could be inside of a food network culture, a foodie network. So when I talk about culture, it is what do you associate with, what do you enjoy, what is your community, what is regionally specific, what is nationally specific, what is internationally specific. Just having an understanding of the different cultures that you enter and exit, are next to, beside, etc. Digital intelligence has everything to do with the digital involvement that we have and are a part of. For instance, all of the social media applications that I am now going to enter into that I wouldn't have before, because my positions and my sense of confidentiality and privacy, and not having a link to the people that I work for from the outside world into them has left me uninterested in participating in social media, other than glancing at it every once in a while. But now I'm diving right in, whereas I think there's probably only one picture of me on the internet at this point. This video represents thousands of frames of photos. So just having a consciousness that the digital world exists, what the impacts are, what the dangers are, how they're affected, how you're affected personally. So digital intelligence is what I talk about. So again, the 6 that I talk about are IQ, which is cognitive intelligence; EQ, which is your emotional intelligence, your ability to deal with the world and understand and how things are affected by you. High quality characteristics are all of those personal things that you have by experiences and by example and by ambition have formed within yourself. It is a type of moral compass that I'll get into a little further. Time-space intelligence, just knowing where you are, what you're about, what opportunities are there, what context there is, what mental chronology you use. Cultural intelligence is just understanding where you are culturally, having a sense of empathy and understanding, having a connection between people culturally, and appreciating that there are many different cultures, and wanting to be a part of it, wanting to learn about those different cultures. And 6 is digital intelligence, just knowing that we're moving from a very analog life into having digital identifications, having digital senses of who we are. This is a continuing list of intelligences. So this is diving now further into my 135 different intelligence spheres. So I'm going to go through these, okay? Communication intelligence, styles, best practices, components, habits, listening, active and passive intelligence, active and passive communications. There's nonverbal communication, active and passive body language. General communications, again, this relates back to my communications high and low .cf, or my civilizations foundations as a point of communications. There are 4 to 6 main elements. Intelligence spheres, again, I'm diving into the personal and individual spheres and how they relate to us individually. Have you thought about how these relate to you individually? Artificial intelligence spheres, quantum computing, sentient beings, artificial neural networks, cognitive neural networks, unintended consequences, discussion of artificial intelligence during unintended consequences, emotional spheres, positive and negative adjectives, how they affect, what words do people use to describe you? What negative words do people use to describe you? So adjectives are agents of psychology. They reflect personality traits, types, and they are often tested. Emotional spheres in terms of temperament and demeanor during normal circumstances and conditions versus the mild, from mild to maximum stress load circumstances. How do you behave during difficult circumstances? Human senses, I talk about pilot senses, just being aware of what's around you. It's said that there are 23 plus human senses, so I go into those as well individually. Psychological spheres are the cause. Business intelligence spheres, I'll go into specific industry domains, sectors, and communities. They're organized by size, public or private forms. Military intelligence spheres, I think about artificial intelligence being the biggest development in military intelligence, and talk about conventional weapons, history, strategy, and tactics. Political science, history, strategy, and tactics. So political intelligence spheres, political science, history, strategies, and tactics, conventional weapons, and history. Biological intelligence spheres, I talk about conventional weapons, history, strategy, and tactics. Tycoon intelligences, I talk about having a taxonomic knowledge of your own intelligences and how to relate those, how to use those as a system, as a method of understanding what's going on around you. Mine began with, like I said, the Tycoon core intelligences. I'll talk about conceptualization and analogies. There are different thinking styles, different cognitive thinking styles. Some are culturally styled bases of thought, and they can also be based on spheres and domains. I have left it very broad in terms of the different intelligence spheres that I think communities around the country, communities around the world, individuals around the world, that these are all relatable and common intelligences. In terms of thinking styles, the cognitive styles, someone may think like an artist as opposed to a scientist. So I put styles down to art versus science, the ability for analysis. It's a type of theory. It's a theory of self-government. I talk about competencies, literacies, and skill sets, raw versus refined competencies, literacies, and skill sets. Learning styles. There are multiple learning styles: visual, auditory, tactile, kinesthetic, sequential, simultaneous, interactive, reflective or logical, and verbal. There's direct experience and indirect experience. These are all learning styles. Last is a rhythmic or a melodic learning style. There are higher education forms of learning. You could be an autodidactic person, you could be a polymath, or you could be a multipotentialite. There are lifelong learners, lifelong readers, learning workers, knowledge workers. I think about contemplation and conventional wisdom. Intellectual property. Intellectual property is a devised system design that is specific to a company, inside of an industry, inside of a sector, etc. Intellectual property could be, for instance, the design of the iPhone. That's intellectual property that belongs to the Apple Corporation, the Apple company. So I talk about intellectual property and how that relates to what I do for the people that I've done work for. In this, I wanted to introduce emotional, personal, professional property. If there's intellectual property for designs, methods, operational development at a corporate level. There should be what I call emotional, personal, professional property, or EPPP, that protects the tycoon against any sort of revealing information. For instance, I don't really want it known inside of my tycoon leadership and counselor tribe that my tycoon might be upset, might be in mourning, might be happy. I think revealing any sort of information outside of the tycoon's knowledge as when someone comes to you and says, hey, how's that person doing? It's different when you represent a tycoon. It's different when you work for a tycoon. Giving information, any information, is one step closer to trying to figure out what a tycoon will do, or making or giving pretense for doing something that is counter to the benefit of the tycoon. Tycoon precious and tangible capital asset markets, currencies, and commodities I've talked about. These are all of the personal nuanced and overt things that, or areas that tycoons get involved with, whether they're in a political environment, a social environment, a personal one-on-one environment. These are things that the tycoon is exchanging constantly, whether it's trust, responsibility, and so I go into that a little bit. Debit, credit activity in the tycoon capital assets. Again, this is the exchange of going back and forth between what we all give individually to others. It's not financial, but it is a capital asset. It's our time, our energy. I talked about intellectual and emotional stamina. All of those are capital assets. Your intellect is a capital asset. Your emotions are a capital asset. Your time is a capital asset. I talk about tycoon leadership intelligence with regard to responsibility, accountability, diplomacy, and volition. I talk about leadership intelligence with regard to ethos and communities or resources. Agreed trust and versus contracts equals trust builder. And again, going back from a very broad explanation or sense of what's going on, I want to bring it back to this individual one-on-one example of interaction between a tycoon leader and a mentee or someone outside of the tribe. Business ethics, etiquettes, and manners. I talk about these. Protocols, procedures, policies, and ethos, human resources. So inside of the corporate structure of discussing how things are structured, put together, what the common understanding is. Again, this all works well in an office environment. This all works well under a company structure of having employees and layers of managers and supervisors, etc. When you are a staff member, when you're a tribe member inside of the Tycoon Leadership Council and tribe member model that I express, you do have to understand all of these corporate requirements and standards and basis and policies, procedures, etc. But I want to first make sure that you understand that you are inside of a tribe. So just having an understanding of what it is to have a tribal commitment, having a corporate commitment and understanding that, and then going further to what I'm going to next describe as a crew member commitment. Elements of civilization's foundations and how they relate to us all individually. Currently, I put out 21 different spheres to build a contextual framework, the relationships, understanding of real-world activities. Tycoon intelligence spheres and domains. I go through definitions, virtues, and characteristics. There are 135 plus, and I'll go ahead and start listing some of these now. Intelligence quotient. We talked about being cognitive, emotional intelligence, high quality characteristics or moral intelligence, time-space intelligence, or time-space quotient. It could also be chronospatial intelligence or mental chronology. Cultural intelligence, digital intelligence. Trust quotient. There are fluid levels to trust. There's fluid and there's crystallized. The crystallized trusts are what you enter into a relationship with, a business relationship, a personal relationship. It says, I will behave like this. Here are the 6 tenets of my trust factor, and these are going to be fixed. Those are crystallized, and you demonstrate, you behave that way. Fluid levels of trust are, I'd like for you to trust me a little more. This is fluid. Here's how I'll earn it. And so that fluid accumulation of trust, you do things to earn that trust, whether it's an agreed trust, a contract trust. You do things to have it become crystallized. So the more crystallization of trust that you have, the higher level of trust that you have and share with somebody else. It can also be depleted, by the way, if you betray a trust or if you can't accomplish something. There's a capability that gets, the trust becomes liquid again. Intellectual virtues or traits. Aristotle put these out as an example millennia ago. Aristotle put these out as virtues or character traits. So I'll just go over these quickly and then I'm going to pause. So intellectual empathy is an intellectual character trait. It's a virtue. Intellectual empathy, intellectual humility. Intellectual empathy, intellectual humility, intellectual courage, intellectual autonomy, intellectual integrity, intellectual perseverance, intellectual confidence in reason, intellectual fair-mindedness, intellectual sense of justice, intellectual honesty. Those are the virtues that Aristotle put out for intellectual capacity. I'm going to stop here and move on to the next. Thank you.